Hotep, I'm Dr. Gloria L, Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. We've titled this show, Spiritual Matters, Freeing Yourself. And I'm glad to invite Wayne Sebamurti Gentry as my guest, because I do love to have these one-on-one satsangs with you. And when we were corresponding back and forth, one of the things that you brought up made me think of this particular title, because you were talking about some work that you're doing having to do with an upcoming book where you're looking at spiritual and mental paralysis. And of course, I thought that it's such an excellent diagnosis. You know, I want to call you Dr. Gentry because you have put your finger right on a problem that we need to be aware of, and a problem that we need to address and resolve. And so I'd like you to talk about that phenomenon that you addressed in a correspondence to me, so we can focus in on that.
Okay. Hotep, and thank you so much for inviting me as your guest, Dr. Peace Gurunana. And yes, it is something that I'm sure all of us have experienced and continue to experience in an ongoing way because of the type of society that we live in. Mental paralysis and spiritual, in the sense that our ultimate development is supposed to be that we become aware of ourselves on a spiritual level, enter into the spiritual dimension of our beingness, which is really being shut down because we're constantly being bombarded with all these different things that are competing for our attention, that's stimulating us sensation-wise. And this over-sensationalism, it actually paralyzes us. And the example I use is, we may have a lot of different things that we need to do, and there's only so much time in which to do these things. And we can think, I'm sure all of us have had this experience, we can think about, okay, I need to do this, and oh man, I also need to do that, and I have to do this. And just in thinking about all the number of things that we need to do and the time in which we need to do it begins to exhaust us, and we become immobilized, in the sense whereas now we feel like we don't know where to start or how to start, and we actually end up doing nothing.
We don't start.
Mm-hmm. So there's a paralysis of that energy and that attention to actually do things that are needed to be done, because we have taken on so many different projects, which in most cases we have been seduced to take them on because of the society that we live in and the structure of the environment that we're exposed to, that it creates sensations in us that actually paralyzes us. And it's not just a sensational thing that's physical, it's mental. And it stops us from mobilizing and doing things that we need to do. And so it's important to disengage our attention from all of the things that compete for our attention, especially in the type of world that we live in now, where we have so many different gadgets that, you know, here it is, play these videos, watch these entertainments. You got Facebook, Twitter, you got
tweeting,
all of these different avenues in which to direct your attention toward, but yet your attention is supposed to be directed toward those things that are going to outcome in your growth, your cultural maturation and your spiritual evolutionary growth. But society is structured in such a way whereas technology is telling you what to pay attention to, and is stifling that growth. It's actually paralyzing, it's arresting your development, because every organism's development is actually canalized towards specific endpoints. And human beings, our end point of development is to that of knowing thyself across the totality of our being, which includes spiritual awareness. And if we are not liberating our attention from those things that are stopping us from reaching that point, that end point of development, then we're being arrested at development, and we're experiencing the mental and spiritual paralysis. We're not mobilizing and allowing our energy and attention to unfold to that point where we become aware of ourselves on that dimension.
Well, I wanted to give you something in support of your thesis, and that is that in reading this book by Sakyong Mepam, which is called Making the Mind, let me give the right title, I don't have to, Turning the Mind into an Ally. Something that I'm sure you will agree with is he says that we're always meditating, you know, and you think of meditation as just going somewhere and seating yourself and quieting the mind, but he says we're always meditating. The problem is that we're not meditating on the things that we need to meditate on. And what you said is we need to be meditating on the end point, our purpose for being here. We need to be meditating on our spiritual development. We need to be meditating on knowing thyself. That is the priority. That is the most important thing. But yet, our meditation is on electronic devices. We are meditating. Everyone is making suggestions about what we should concentrate or focus our minds on. And the consequence is that we get results other than the result that we need. Because at the end of the day, even if you master every electronic device, even if you have every updated electronic device, it does not further your spiritual development. You do not, what you know is that device, what you know is that instrument. You don't know this instrument. And this is the instrument on which you need to meditate, because this is the most precious thing that you own, your precious human life.
Exactly. I agree wholeheartedly. And it reminds me of a very important statement that Ramana Maharshi made, the mystic from India. He said that all learning that proceeds not from the learning of oneself, and all knowledge that is the outcome of that, amounts to learned ignorance.
Okay.
If you do not know the one who knows, the knower, then everything that you knowing is a form of ignorance. Because ignorance, gnosis is knowing, self-knowledge. And that ignorance, that not knowing thyself, is really the root problem. That it is the problem, the main problem from which every other thing springs from.
It's the root of suffering.
The root of suffering, because all suffering is related to attachment to that which is false. Not knowing the false is ignorance. And if we look at our lives and how we relate to other people, to how we structure our relationships, the intentions that we form, many different things that we do, we will see that at those moments where we're feeling miserable, where we're feeling discomfort, where we are really suffering, it is because we have attached ourselves to something that is false. If we give a clear inspection of it, then that inspection, that looking, will allow us to detach. And this, I'm reminded of two very important words, Sanskrit terms, viveka and vairagya. Viveka is clear seeing, which always precedes vairagya, which is detachment. Many of us are attached to things that are false, which causes our suffering because we have not clearly seen what they are. When you clearly see what they are, then you will cease to be attached to it. You see the falseness of it. And in that falling away, now there's liberation from that feeling of being in misery and suffering. And most suffering and misery comes from trying to change things that we cannot change. Trying or being unwilling to accept things that we must accept. And this characterizes the lifestyles of just about everybody who have not really looked inward to see who they really are and to start moving from that point in terms of paying attention to essential things. Because as you mentioned from reading the book, Turning Our Mind into an Ally, there's so many things that are competing for our attention that's not directed toward that inward growth, coming to know thyself. And in that sense, our mind becomes an enemy because naturally it is that which helps to reflect and to know thyself, that knowing principle. In ancient Egypt, we were referred to as Rekhe beings, knowing beings. And this knowing principle is seeking to unfold itself to a full maturation. But when our attention is constantly being directed toward machines and technology, and now we surrender our own inner intelligence to a machine to tell us when things are right or what to do, that impedes our growth. It arrests our development. It stops this natural movement that the mind is having to know thyself. And now we become linked and attached to things that will never give us that knowledge. And in fact, what we actually do is we become identified with outward things. We start to make our identity something that it is not. And this all comes from not investigating and introspecting and meditating in the right way. As you also mentioned in the book, we're always meditating to some degree because our attention is always being pulled to fixate and stabilize on something. And where your attention is, that's where your energy goes. And the energy is that which energizes, that which moves and awakens and connects with your awareness is this energy. It's inward energy. But if you're meditating on the wrong thing, then naturally you're not going to connect with that potential which is within you, which is supposed to be actualized into a self-knowing that would help you to really be who you always have been, always are, and always will be, except for you're unaware of it. And meditation is the principal means by which you discipline your attention so that you can know thyself and then act on the basis of that knowledge. This is what really reveals a spiritual person, aside from them just having the intellectual know-how to speak about spiritual matters. It expresses itself in their living as compassion, as infinite patience, love,
kindness,
mercy, kindness, affection, artistic creativity, supreme intelligence. This is what you see flowing from the lives of spiritual beings, because there are no false identities that they are connected to that's causing misery and suffering. There's no competition. None of these things exist.
Well, the book also speaks about meditation that is directed on a false sense of self, as you keep pointing out. Mm-hmm. The me. You know, everything is directed at how to make me comfortable, how to make me happy, how to entertain me, how to satisfy me, how to make the world conform to my ideas about how the world should be. And when you spoke about this whole notion of people, the ignorance of being a big concentrating on having things be in a particular way or not having them be the way they are. You know, not accepting what reality is here, it is raining, and you are denouncing the rain because you want the sun to shine because this is the day of your birthday party or your wedding. So the ignorance that comes from being associated with false ideas, and especially false ideas about who you are, grow directly out of meditating on the wrong things, because if one meditates on knowing thyself, the act of meditating on knowing thyself would take one directly to just looking at the human beingness, you know, just marveling at the fact that here I am, a human being. And out of all the things that I might have been born to be, I have been born a human being. And what advantages does this human birth give to me?
Exactly. We take for granted the human birth. This is a precious human birth because life is everywhere. It's in everything. There's nothing that does not have life. And the incarnations that life expresses itself through, of all of the incarnations, the human birth is that incarnation through which life can know itself and express itself across the totality of what it is. And we have not been exposed to what life is in its rightful sense because of our misinformed, so-called miseducation, which is really not an education, training, and our way that we have been socialized. We haven't been exposed to the rituals and the spiritual teachings that help you to know what your potentials are and how you're supposed to be maturing as a human being and move your energies across the levels of consciousness, which are referred to as chakras, opening up those chakras and actually knowing on those higher levels. We're not exposed to that. And because we're not exposed to that, our energy is just being poured and turned every which way.
Dissipated.
Instead of it being transmuted, instead of it being transformed. Because in many ways, we are organisms very similar to a butterfly. Whereas the butterfly goes through a physical metamorphosis and the caterpillar becomes that which flies. Our transformation takes place on a conscious level. The body is not going to change, but we go through a conscious transformation, whereas we awaken to ourselves as total beings. There's no limit to what we can do. And the interesting thing, I like to say this before it slipped my mind when you were speaking about the me and all of the things that we want for me. And when you spoke about ignorance, I'll say something about both of those. If you really look for this me, who we are calling ourselves, you will not find it. It does not exist. It's not a real entity. It's an appearance that we believe in, not something that we believed in from our own intention. Also, it's something that other people have helped us to believe in, which is, of course, again, being helped to believe in something that is false is rooted in ignorance, not knowing the real. But that me, who we think we are, does not exist. It is a believed in phenomenon. And there are many things that people believe in that does not exist. And you will have real effects of experiences that come from that, because belief is very powerful. You can believe that a shadow that you see is an assailant of something that's out to harm you. In reality, is not. But because you believe that, you will sweat, all kinds of physical changes will take place. Fear will emerge in you.
You have a real response.
Real responses, you know. Or if you're walking down a road, the classic example also that is you will find in mystical literature all over the world, as you're walking down a road and you see something that looks like a snake, and you have very real responses to that. But upon closer inspection, you see that it's just a rope. All of that drops away. The same thing is true for ourselves. We haven't really clearly seen who we are, which is this another definition for meditation. Medi, the root word from which we get meditation, also means to see. The Sanskrit term for it is dhyana, and there's a dhyan meditation that people engage in that involves inner seeing. And if you really see and inspect, you will find out that this me does not exist, in the same way that you thought there was a snake when it really was a rope. It does not exist. And the ignorance is not a solid state of mind. It is something that is being recreated on a moment-to-moment basis. And this is why when you meditate and you disengage your attention from the mental constructs, the thoughts and the emotions that's helping to produce this ignorance, you're liberated from it. And you're able to now ascend to higher levels of awareness.
It's breaking through.
Breaking through instead of breaking down. Most people break down. And they break down because they're not really connected to the adequate means, the adequate resources, or the right approach toward understanding the spiritual teachings. And this is why it's very important to have a guide, someone who has traveled those roads or is traveling those roads to help guide you along in your spiritual development. Many people who are trying to develop themselves, if they are so spiritually unguided, is very, very dangerous, because you're working with energy that can either you can break down or you can break through. You can go into,
or you can break up.
You can break up
and disintegrate.
In psychosis, you can really, lose a hold on it altogether. But such is life, So it's not something so much to be fearful of. It's just to know that I need, some help in figuring this out. And there's help all around us. But again, by there being so much technology all around us, our attention is solicited and seduced. It's being solicited by it, and we're seduced to give attention to it. That's arresting our development, and then we're not finding time to pay attention to that which would aid in our spiritual growth.
Well, I did a show called Arrested Development, and that one was talking about drugs, and particularly illegal drugs, to which people become addicted, and therefore, their development is arrested. They don't grow beyond this constant quest for obtaining this drug, this substance to which they are addicted. And so you have arrested development in that sense, that you simply do not go beyond the level where you are. In fact, you not only do you not go beyond it, but you begin to devolve rather than evolve.
Right.
And it's important that we understand that we are going, as human beings, as living, breathing organisms, we are going to be growing or not. But the cells in our bodies are moving and recreating themselves. Some are being born, some are growing old, some are dying. Nothing is static in the universe. So everything is moving. And if you are not a conscious participant in the direction of your growth, then you are growing like weeds. You know, weeds are growing in your consciousness, weeds are growing everywhere, but nothing that is fruit, nothing that is beneficial to you is taking place.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And weeds grow in uncultivated land. See, culture, cultivation, when you allow a land to be uncultivated, then all kinds of things are going to just grow wildly. And the absence of cultivation is what makes those weeds grow. In the same way, culture is needed in human relationships for the correct maturation of process of human growth. And when there's an absence of culture, then the energy, the emotions, all that needs to be disciplined, the morality, all the things that needs to be disciplined for there to be growth is arrested. There's arrested development. Absence of culture, no cultivation. And when there's an absence of that cultivation, then that can lead to the taking on of drugs and becoming addicted. And I remember on a prior show, I was with I can't remember the gentleman's name, but we were talking about addiction, and I talked about how a problem is when you have a challenge thrown at you and you find yourself inadequate or lacking the resources to meet and overcome that challenge. And if you so find that you're in a position where you're inadequate and you can't overcome the challenge, then that's going to produce in you discomfort and tension and stress, because naturally you want to move forward. Your natural tendency is to evolve, to progress. And if this tension and stress and discomfort becomes unbearable, then you're going to seek relief. You're going to have to give yourself some relief from that. And then that's when people, instead of turning toward natural things to give yourself relief from it, the way society is structured, and especially if you're living in poverty-stricken communities, you're going to turn toward things that you can become addicted to. So it's natural to seek relief from tension and stress and all of that, but the means by which you go and seek that release can be unnatural. And being that a problem exists where there's lack and inadequacy of resources, you see this so clearly in our communities. We don't have adequate resources. We're always lacking. We're always impoverished in terms of having the necessary tools, whether it's being tools, mental tools, to correctly identify problems and solve things, social, at the social level. If we're being misinformed and we have inadequate knowledge, then we're going to have problems. And problems are constantly being created in the African community through neglect, deprivation, and because of that, then there's all kinds of things that are really symptoms of the problem, where you may see crime, where you may see overindulgence, indulgence in sex, alcohol. These things exist in communities where there are lack and inadequate resources, and they're not something intrinsic to the nature of the people who are having these experiences. They are victims of a problem that has been created through an obstruction of them having access to adequate resources and tools from which they can meet the challenges that they face and overcome them.
You know, when you put it in those terms, I can see that clearly, and I can see the problem compounded not only because of the lack of resources or the deprivation that we experience in the community, but also the advertising of all kinds of goods and services that are beyond our reach, so that we are either desiring these things constantly, or we're struggling to try to attain these things constantly, or we're trying to replace these things that become obsolete because the economy is based on planned obsolescence. So you got these gym shoes, you finally struggle up on enough money to get these, and now they've come out with another model. And so the ones you have are you know, passe, they old school, and you need to get something else. So we don't have enough in the first place, and then we're made to believe that if we have more, this me will be happy. Me will be happy if I have the things that I see coming across my screen on my television, I hear advertised on the radio, I see on the billboard or on the covers of magazines and other publications. So that you have all of these distractions, all of these things that are, as you say, vying for your attention. You know, you don't ever get the direction to prioritize, to decide that you prefer to have this and not that. You prefer to do this and not those other things. That you can't do everything simultaneously, or you can't have everything simultaneously. So maybe you should just center your attention on something that will have the most value. My granddaughter, who is 8 years old, had learned the word evaluate. And we spent a long time in the kitchen with her evaluating the beverages in the refrigerator and just using that word in such a way that it became her own. But evaluation, to even have the basis, and I had to teach her about criteria because she had evaluate. So we said, what is the basis? What are we going to use? Are we going to use the appearance? Are we going to use the flavor? What are we going to use for the basis? So what is your basis for placing value on this activity or this object? Are your values coming from somewhere outside of you? Is somebody sending a message to you that says that you ought to value this more than your life? You ought to value sticking up this grocery store more than your freedom. You know, you ought to put your life on the line for trinkets and things that are transient and go out of style.
Right. And you know, so many of us do not see clearly how our personality is not something that we have just created. You know, it's basically being created for us. Many of our likes and dislikes. Those of us who have not really introspected and meditated to come to a center of knowing thyself. Those who are ego-driven, which relates to the vast majority of people. The personalities are created. The type of shoes that I like, that like was created for me. Through all of this marketing and advertising and saying I'm going to be hip and how I'm going to, you know, gain so much appeal by having these kinds of shoes. Popularity. So popular consciousness. And so now I have these type of shoes, and you know, I read these kinds of books. My interest has been moved in the direction toward these types of books because there's again the advertisement in the markets of it saying that this is the type of knowledge that you need to have. It's all coming from the outside, not from the inside, whereas real education is the coming forth of that which is within, the bringing forth of that knowledge that is already within you. That's when you're really being educated. And just all of the things that we are claiming to be all the things that we are placing value in, superficial things, they're transient. They're not rewarding. They don't contribute to our growth. And I'm reminded of ancient Egyptian proverb which says, worship the gods if you must, but first know thyself. Know who you are. You have to know who you are. Without knowing thyself, then any other kind of knowing is not real knowing, because you have not come to understand the knower from which the knowledge of other things is coming from. Mm-hmm. So you have to know the life that is expressing itself through this human body. And the Sanskrit term that I'm reminded of that refers to this type of knowledge, this knowing, is vimarsa. This consciousness has the ability to be self-reflective, to know thyself. In fact, this is where we get the term, it's not directly, but it's connected. Human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens, man who knows that he knows. Not just the knowing being, but the fact that you have the capacity to know that you know. We're supposed to be knowing the knower. Knowing thyself, that's supposed to be the highest value that you place, to which you direct your energies and your attention. And everything in your life hinges on your attention and your attention-giving abilities. In fact, everything is held together by attention. And lack of attention causes things to fall apart. If people didn't pay attention as they're driving down the streets, then that's when accidents take
causes
place.
Calamity.
If they're not paying attention to what their car is telling them that some maintenance is needed, then your car is gonna be the source of an accident. Your brakes may fail. Mm-hmm. All kinds of things happen. And this stretches out across everything that you do. You're paying attention at all times. It's like you're meditating. Mm-hmm. They are connected. Meditation works with attention. Mm-hmm. It's a disciplining of attention, so that you learn how to pay right attention to essential things that connects with your growth, to expand your awareness, so that now you can see beyond the limitations of what you thought was real, but is only an appearance. You can see beyond this personality that you have identified yourself with and calling by a certain name. You can see yourself as being beyond that, not even that. And in that seeing is so total that mystics who have had such a seeing have equated their beingness with divinity, and where many was said to have blasphemed, because they say, who have seen me have seen the Father. I am the Father, I one. You know, I am God. So that is the ultimate unfoldment of our development, where we're supposed to be in terms of our awareness. We are already that, but we're not aware of it. You can never not be what you already are, but you can be unaware of it. So the challenge becomes to find the tools, the adequate resources, that which you need to help you to meet this ignorance, and overcome it and become aware of who you already are. And the principal means of meditation, beyond just the ordinary meditation that is done in terms of attending to things, the principal means of meditation involves disengaging your attention from all of these things that are soliciting you to pay attention to, so that now you can free up attention and energy so that they can move up to the higher centers of your consciousness and now illuminate it, and that you can become aware. In fact, I like to define yoga as the science, the spiritual science of consciousness integration and human illumination, because we have conscious centers in our bodies that is to be integrated, lower and higher nature. And as you integrate those conscious centers, there's an illumination that takes place. You become an enlightened being. You know thyself across the totality of the reality of who you really are.
You know, you just arrest my development because you caused me to think so many things. Mm-hmm. One of the things I thought about was a concept of spiritual glaucoma. Mm. If you understand glaucoma, it is a visual disorder in which the peripheral vision is gradually so impaired that in order to see something to the right side, you have to turn to the right, or to the left the same. Up, you have to look up. Down, you have to look down, because it does not come into your line of sight. It doesn't come into your line of vision. Many of us are walking around with spiritual glaucoma, because if it doesn't come right in front of us, right in the line of vision, we have no idea that it is even there. And of course, having no idea that it is there dwarfs that which we see, because we only see a part of the picture. We don't see the whole picture. We don't see the God. Right. We don't see that I and the Father are one, because all we can see is a me. Mm-hmm. We don't even see the I. We don't see the I am. Right. And when you spoke like that, I could see this as another one of the disorders that we have, that leads to our inability to grow.
Yeah, and me itself, and I know you know, being a linguistic doctor, me is an objective pronoun. So you've objectified yourself the moment you say me. So, and this is where our attention is always at, in this objectified fictional entity that really does not exist.
Well, now, if you're going to go there, we're going to have to take that to another point at which an object is that which is acted upon. An object is never a subject. It is never the doer of the action. Right. So as long as you are a me, you are always going to be acted upon by forces outside of your me-ness. Right. You will never be an I that acts upon its environment or takes action, but you will be that which is always the object of the action taken by others or external sources. Right.
And every type of action that you're involved in is characterized by reaction. No type of proaction, no action.
Right, because
you're just reacting.
Right, because you're an object.
The object is conditioned.
Right.
It's something that's already set in place.
Right.
That you are reacting
and you're receiving action. You're always an object receives action. It does not perform action. It does not do action. It receives action. Right. So who in their right mind would want to be a me?
That's where the insight has to come. See, without having that insight, then we cling on to this me out of ignorance, not really seeing. And it's very interesting. You remind me, as you were speaking about the spiritual glaucoma and not being able to really see peripherally the dimension of ourselves that is the spirit is reminds me of the Dogon system of education, whereas Jericho is only being able to see that which is right in front of you. There's 4 levels. The first one is Jericho, just being able to see that which is in front of you. You can't see what's on the side of you. Don't have no peripheral vision, only that which is right in front of you. Then there's Beniso, which is where you are able to see now peripherally, not just what's in front of you, but what's on the sides of you. Now your seeing has expanded. There's Boloso, being able to see what's behind you. That's where the insight is. You know, you have 360-degree vision, where you can see what's in front of you, on the sides of you, and what's in back of you. That's the seeing, having a perception of the whole. That's what the insight is. Now, that's not the highest. The highest is Sogai, that inner clear seeing, the inward seeing. And this is where you now see and know thyself. See, they had a system of where you're really being educated to gain access to the full awareness of your spiritual beingness. And it takes you from Jeriso, Beniso, Boloso to Sogai. We only have a so-called training system, not really an education system, where everything is objectified and you can only see very dimly what's in front of you, not what's on the side of you. The perspectives of seeing with peripheral vision as it relates to your human beingness.
And that is a caricature. It's not a true reflection of who you are. It is not a true image.
Right.
So you're seeing a cartoon character.
Right. And believing in it, that is who you are.
And defending it.
And defending it.
And getting insulted when something offends it.
Right. And that's one of the main things that characterize a deeply engrossed ego personality. Very defensive. You know? Very arrogant, in the sense that arrogance is a way of arrogating to yourself a false sense of pride, of qualities and virtues that you don't really possess. It's not real. And very defensive, because there's this that you have to protect, this otherness that's threatened really the exposure of you,
this fictitious identity that if exposed would evaporate.
It's like I believe in intelligence, the Nature of Intelligence book, I speak about it as being having a rainbow existence. The rainbow is not a concrete thing that exists as you see it. You know, it is something that is an appearance. It has something to do with the light and the droplets have being at a certain angle, striking it, produces this array of colors. Because you see rainbows not just in the sky, you will see them on the ground also. Certain oils that's on the street and water and light, and it breaks it up until it's color spectrum. But the rainbow doesn't exist as a concrete entity, and if you approach it as such, if you believe in it as such, then you're believing in something false. And our ego personality, this me that we call ourselves, has that type of existence. It's like a rainbow. Nobody sees the exact same rainbow because it is an angle perception. It's created from an angle perception. Nobody sees the exact same me that you're calling yourself. Nobody sees you the same way. So this me that you're saying who you are, it's not being experienced by your wife, by your husband, by your son, by your brother, your sister, in the same way. It's all variety. It's all
perception.
It's a trick that's being played in the mind. And once you
my vision of you is coming from me. I project the you that I see.
Exactly. And that's what we need to see. in our relation, across, of course, all relationships, but we really need to see that in our interpersonal relationships, because a lot of times we're so quick to blame the other and say that they are the reason for our frustration or whatever it is that's going wrong, without realizing much of what we're seeing is a projection. It's being projected. And this is why, if you really don't get involved in meditation in a way where you're disciplining your attention to see and watch your mind, not just be identified with your mind saying that, okay, I have to consult with my mind to tell me what's going on, but know that who you are is beyond the mind, and see this mind. If you don't get involved in meditation at that level where you're able to do that, then you're going to always have problems on personal level, interpersonal level, and you will not move into an area of growth that involves your transpersonal growth. And you will be arrested in your development. And as we said earlier, human birth is so precious. And life has moved through, as it is spoken of in the spiritual tradition, one particular spiritual tradition, 84,000 incarnations. You're a human being. The purpose of life in this human form is to know thyself. And when we do not achieve that, realize that, then we are experiencing arrested development. No matter how knowledgeable we may be in a scholastic sense, no matter how wealthy we may be in a financial sense, no matter what, if you have not fulfilled the purpose of your human birth and resurrecting that knowledge, that twice born, that virgin birth, the symbolism of all that relates to you, and you becoming born again and knowing yourself. Can't be physically born again, but you can have a spiritual birth. If you're not entering into practices and disciplines that will enable you to have that knowledge, then you're experiencing an arrested development. You're not a fully human being.
And you can't bribe the law. You can't offer the law your degrees and your wealth and your beauty and your, all your trinkets,
Right.
and convince the law that you have reached the level of consciousness where you know thyself.
Right.
It has to actualize, or you have to continue until it does.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great pleasure to have these opportunities to sit with you, Sebamurti, because as I've told you at our last satsang, you bring out the best in us. Because to meditate on this kind of content helps us to grow. It helps us to examine the notions and the ideas and the conduct that we're engaging in, so that we can become clearer, so that we can experience that viveka,
Right.
that you talked about. And of course, to begin to value the clarity more than you value those things that obscure clarity, so that you don't paralyze yourself by riding off in every direction simultaneously, but you are clear about the course that you want to travel, and you have some sensitivity to when you're veering
Right.
from that course.
And it's always a pleasure sacronym and an honor to speak in dialogue and satsang with you, because you have such a caring heart. And I'm sure all of your audience, they know that, they tune in. In fact, people of all ages constantly tell me that they've seen me on your show, and 10, 12-year-olds, some of my son's friends, brothers, and elders, everybody tune in, and they tune in not just for the information on the show, but I think they're tuning in also because at a deeper level they're really touched by the care that you bring to all of the variety of topics that you have on your show. So it's always an honor and pleasure to talk with you, because I get to really bathe in this genuine affection that's rare, that you don't find in many people. And one of the things that also can help bring about that clarity and help you to see things clearly as terms of prioritizing what it is you should be doing with your life energy is to sitting down and contemplating your own death and dying. 'Cause death sobers you up. It makes you think about what I really need to be doing. Because in contemplating that, many of us don't know what's on the other side, but we have this instinct, the feeling that there is something, that there's no end to life. It's not that you just live once and then that's it. You can believe in that until you really seriously contemplate death, or you're going through a dying experience. You know that there's something else. There are after-death experiences. And when you look at your life and see how you have lived and what you have done and what you are doing, and contemplating your death, that will sober you up. Say, well, I don't know when I'm going to die. That's the reality of it. I may not know under what circumstances, where. It can happen tomorrow. So what am I doing with my life's energy now? And if I do die, what are the after-death experiences? Am I going to be accountable for something? Then I need to take a moment to be serious about prioritizing my energies right now.
Thank you. Well, we have spent all the time that we have, but I'm glad we did spend it. I'm glad I didn't interrupt you and I let you continue.